By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe had ended. Germany lay in ruins, its armies defeated. But across the world, in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, the fighting raged on with a terrible ferocity. The United States and its allies were moving closer to Japan, island by bloody island. Each battle, from Iwo Jima to Okinawa, was a brutal testament to the cost of victory. The fighting was desperate, and the losses on both sides were staggering. American military planners looked at a map of Japan and prepared for the final, most dreadful phase of the war, a full-scale invasion of the Japanese home islands. This operation, codenamed Operation Downfall, was scheduled for the following year. They expected 1 million American casualties and many more Japanese. In Japan, the situation was dire. American B-29 bombers had been systematically firebombing its cities for months, turning urban centers into seas of fire and ash. The country's industrial capacity was crippled. Its navy was at the bottom of the sea. A naval blockade had cut off essential supplies and the Japanese people faced starvation. Yet, the military leadership refused to yield. They were guided by a warrior code, Bushido, that viewed surrender as the ultimate dishonor. They prepared for a final decisive battle on their own soil. They called it Ketsu-go. The plan was to mobilize the entire population, arming men, women, and even children with bamboo spears if necessary, to meet the invaders on the beaches and fight to the last person. For the American soldiers, sailors, and Marines fighting in the Pacific, the thought of invading Japan was a nightmare. They had seen the enemy's willingness to fight to the death. They had faced kamikaze pilots who turned their planes into guided missiles. They knew that an invasion would be a bloodbath unlike any the world had ever seen. Back home, families anxiously waited for news, praying for the day their loved ones could finally return. The war had already stretched on for years, a constant presence in every American town. The end seemed both impossibly distant and terrifyingly close. A final, awful sacrifice that everyone dreaded but believed was necessary to win the war. The Allies issued a final warning to Japan in late July 1945. It was called the Potsdam Declaration. It called for the unconditional surrender of all Japanese armed forces. It warned of prompt and utter destruction if Japan refused. The leaders in Tokyo, however, remained divided. The hardline military faction believed they could inflict such heavy casualties on an invading force that the Allies would offer better peace terms. They chose to ignore the ultimatum, holding out hope for a negotiated settlement through the neutral Soviet Union. For a few more agonizing weeks, the war machine continued to grind on, pushing the world ever closer to a catastrophic final battle that, thankfully, would never come. The first week of August 1945 changed the course of human history forever. On the morning of August 6th, an American B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay flew high over the city of Hiroshima. It carried a new kind of weapon, one of unimaginable power. At 8:15 a.m., it released a single atomic bomb. In a flash of blinding light and searing heat, the city was obliterated. Tens of thousands of people were killed instantly. Many more would die in the days, weeks, and years that followed from horrific burns and radiation sickness. The destruction was absolute. It was a level of devastation that the world had never witnessed from a single weapon. The age of nuclear warfare had begun. News of the attack on Hiroshima reached Tokyo, but the full scope of the disaster was not immediately understood. To some in the military leadership, it seemed like just another, albeit more powerful, bombing. They clung to their strategy, still hoping the Soviet Union would help them negotiate an end to the war. But their hopes were shattered just 3 days later. On August 9th, the Soviet Union, which had remained neutral in the Pacific conflict, suddenly declared war on Japan. A massive Soviet army, with more than 1 million soldiers, invaded Manchuria, a vast territory in northern China that was occupied by the Japanese Kwantung Army. The Japanese forces there were quickly overwhelmed. That same day, August 9th, brought a second devastating blow from the sky. Another American B-29 bomber appeared over Japan, this time heading for the city of Kokura. Bad weather saved that city, but the plane diverted to its secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., a second atomic bomb was dropped. Like Hiroshima, Nagasaki was instantly engulfed in fire and destruction. Another tens of thousands of lives were extinguished in a moment. 2 cities had been wiped off the map in just 3 days. The Japanese government was now faced with an impossible situation. They were being attacked by a new, terrible weapon on one side, and a powerful new enemy on the other. The twin shocks of the atomic bombs and the Soviet invasion finally broke the stalemate within Japan's ruling council. The emperor, Hirohito, had remained largely silent throughout the war, a divine figurehead who reigned but did not rule. But now, seeing his country on the brink of total annihilation, he decided he must intervene. In a dramatic meeting with his top advisors held in an underground bomb shelter, he made his decision. He told them the war must end. He could not bear to see his people suffer any longer. Japan would accept the terms of the Potsdam Declaration. The only condition was that the institution of the emperor would be allowed to remain. The decision was made, but the world did not yet know. On August 14, 1945, a message was sent to the Allied powers, accepting the terms of surrender. In the United States, President Harry S. Truman announced the news to a waiting nation. The war was over. Across America and in Allied countries around the globe, people poured into the streets in a spontaneous explosion of joy and relief. Strangers hugged and danced. In New York's Times Square, a famous photograph captured a sailor kissing a nurse, a single image that came to symbolize the pure, unbridled ecstasy of that moment. They called it VJ Day, for victory over Japan. The long, dark years of global conflict had finally come to an end. For the people of Japan, the news came in an unprecedented way. On August 15th at noon, radios across the country broadcast a message from Emperor Hirohito himself. It was the first time the Japanese public had ever heard his voice. Speaking in a formal, courtly Japanese that was difficult for many to understand, he announced that Japan had accepted the Allied demands. He spoke of a new and most cruel bomb, and the need to endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable to pave the way for a grand peace. For a nation taught that surrender was unthinkable, the emperor's words were a profound shock, but they also brought an end to the fighting. While the fighting had stopped, the formal end of the war was yet to come. On September 2, 1945, a solemn ceremony took place in Tokyo Bay. Dignitaries from Japan and the Allied nations gathered on the deck of the American battleship USS Missouri. The mighty warship was a symbol of American power, and it was anchored in the heart of the defeated nation. Representing Japan, Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu and General Yoshijiro Umezu stepped forward. With slow, somber movements, they signed the official instrument of surrender. They were followed by representatives from the Allied powers, led by U.S. General Douglas MacArthur. General MacArthur, acting as the supreme commander for the Allied powers, accepted the surrender. He spoke not of vengeance, but of a better world. "It is my earnest hope," he said, "and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past, a world founded upon faith and understanding." Representatives from the United States, China, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, Australia, Canada, France, the Netherlands, and New Zealand each signed the document in turn. The ceremony lasted just 23 minutes. With the final signature, World War II was officially over. After years of unimaginable death and destruction, peace had finally returned to the world. The end of the war ushered in an era of profound change. For the millions of soldiers returning home, it was a time of readjustment to a life without conflict. For the nations that had been devastated by war, it was the beginning of a long and difficult road to recovery. In Japan, the surrender marked the end of its empire and the beginning of a new identity as a pacifist nation under a constitution written with American guidance. The formal ceremony aboard the USS Missouri was more than just an end to the fighting. It was the start of a new global order. The world had been remade by the conflict, and now it had to learn to live in the atomic age that the war had created. Today, 80 years later, the memory of that day continues to shape our world. On August 15, 2025, Japan marked the anniversary with a solemn ceremony, where Emperor Naruhito, the grandson of Emperor Hirohito, expressed his deep remorse for the war. In the United States, on September 2nd, communities gather for VJ Day ceremonies, like the one at the Fort Miles Historical Association in Delaware, to honor the veterans and remember the sacrifices made to secure peace. These commemorations serve as a vital link to the past, a way to ensure that the generation that fought the war, now fading from our sight, is never forgotten. Their stories are a crucial part of our shared history. But remembering the end of the war is not always simple. History is complex. and its interpretation remains a subject of debate. In East Asia, the memory of Japan's wartime aggression is still a source of tension. Countries like China and South Korea continue to call on Japan to fully confront its past. Controversies, such as visits by Japanese politicians to the Yasukuni Shrine, which honors convicted war criminals among its war dead, highlight the different ways the war is remembered and the wounds that have yet to fully heal. These ongoing discussions show that history is not just about the past. It is a living thing that affects the present and shapes the future of international relations. Ultimately, remembering the surrender of Japan is about more than just celebrating a victory or marking an anniversary. It is a profound responsibility. It is about honoring the memory of the estimated 70 to 85 million people who lost their lives in the deadliest conflict in human history. It is about reflecting on the difficult choices made in the final days of the war, including the use of atomic weapons. It is a reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating consequences of war. As we look back across 8 decades, the echoes of 1945 compel us to learn from the past, to strive for understanding among nations, and to work tirelessly to ensure that such a global catastrophe never happens again.